Welcome to the Architect of Resilience podcast, where we explore the secrets of overcoming life's challenges and unlocking unstoppable strength through deep personal conversations and expert insights.
Longer skis, if you're not that good, is trying to slow down. Well, make your skis super slow. I mean, super short, and then you can go straight down double black diamond with moguls and feel like an I need to carry it on your luggage, like carry on luggage. It's that small.
Man, that's brilliant.
That's big, yeah.
I need to get up on the hills myself. I've got my snowboarding as my thing. Pretty big
sweet
up here in the Northwest. So, yeah,
I've always wanted to try that. It looks like it'd be a lot of fun.
If you're ready to go like 5 times smashing on your ass, then that's fine. Like, it's not fun for a while. You're just going to be hurting a lot and hitting. Like, literally, you need to get Charmin, like 2 Charmin rolls, and stick them on your butt. And I'm not kidding. Because you would just unexpectedly fall on your ass.
I'll look like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Well, now that I'm down to 240, 230, 240 range, like I need to get up. When I was at 280 and not mobile, like it was you fall down and I couldn't reach my bindings, and it was just like, as soon as I stand up, I'm like, there's this. It ended up on Fox Sports. It was because I went snowboarding with no shirt on and fat bells in my hands. Nice. I was just like, so I'm down the slopes. My sister was behind me. She's worked the mountains for like 15 years or 20 years, so she's really amazing. So she was GoPro behind me. And went all the way down behind me. And it's a really epic video because you wouldn't expect somebody like me to actually, if I'm standing, I snowboard really well. But at the time, it's like, if I fell over, then there'd be a problem.
Man, that would have been awesome.
Yeah. Well, I hit record because I thought this conversation was kind of funny, but
sure.
Just hit my ketones. Frank, I honestly don't know how to pronounce your last name. How do you say that?
The double L's is a Y sound, so I like to say Llosa like llama, just to confuse people. So it's the opposite of llama.
Frank Llama or Frank Llosa. Well, I want to welcome everybody.
5 llamas.
I want to welcome everybody back to our Architect of Resilience. Today, let's jump into discussion. So we're doing a deep dive into metabolic health and performance optimization. I mean, 2 areas where science application converge to redefine what's possible. So joining us today is Frank Llama, Frank Llosa, founder and CEO of Ketone Aid, a visionary force pioneering the realm of exogenous ketones and ketone esters. These compounds are reshaping how we understand energy, endurance, and mental clarity, which is why I just downed some. I know you guys had some just before we started. Not as a vague promise, but as tangible tools for peak performance. Frank's story is one of relentless curiosity, from competitive sports to the front lines of biohacking. His journey is a testament to a principle I hold dear myself: the synthesis of knowledge and lived experience, like putting those 2 together. So under his leadership, Ketone Aid has created products that's fueled transformations, empowering elite athletes and everyday individuals alike to unlock new levels of potential. Today's conversation, it's more of a science talk today. It's about mastery. We'll explore the biochemistry behind ketones, their role in energy metabolism, and their implications for daily life. Whether you're chasing, podium finishes, battling brain fog during grueling work days, or simply seeking clarity in a chaotic world, this episode, I hope that we can offer strategies to integrate these superfuels into your life and hopefully provide some clarity for our users, as I have been learning in recent months how valuable they are outside of a carnivore, a keto type, a carb depleted diet. So expect actionable strategies, some hard truths, and perhaps challenge to rethink how you approach fuel and function. So let's prepare to redefine your relationship with energy and performance with the none other Frank Llosa. let's get to work talking. How's that for an intro?
Thank you. Good. Sounds good.
So obviously, I've got my co-host, Anthony Castor, who's joined me on all of the cellular medicine series. So I consider this one an extension and hope to have Anthony co-hosting a bit more because Anthony is well more versed on the ketone world that I am learning in. Interesting, I did have some very early experiences when they first came to market, when Patrick Arnold first did the synthesis and brought some out. I used the salts for a very limited period of time, and I didn't see, honestly, that much of an impact on them at that point in time. God, that was maybe 8 years ago. I can't remember.
That's the exact number I was going to say, 8, maybe even 9 for the racemic salts, yeah.
Let's dive into the world of optimizing your overall health. With pushing my physical limits, I encountered significant reductions in my health, and I reached out to Merrick Health as the premier telehealth service. I loved their personalized health coaching from the comfort of my home. They empower you with the choice of self-service diagnostic labs, or what I chose, the guided optimization with expert interpretations of blood work, health coaching, and with medications delivered to my door. Merrick Health is your partner in optimizing your health. Listeners can seize a fantastic 10% discount off their first blood work with code RESILIENCE at merrickhealth.com. That's code RESILIENCE for 10% off. For listeners unfamiliar with the science, can you explain what ketones are and how they function as an energy source in the body?
Great. So for the most part, the body can run on 2 fuel sources, glucose, sugar, and ketones. But the world hasn't really experienced ketones because it's hard for your body to tap into that. So some people call it an emergency fuel source or a fourth food group. So you got carbs, protein, fat, and then now you've got ketones in its own group. So the way to trigger your body to make its own ketones is one of 2 ways: multi-day fast, so 2-3 days just water or no water, and your body will be starved of glucose, and your body will say, "Hey, if you don't start, giving me more sugar, I'm going to go to your fat reserves, shove the fat through the liver, and convert it into ketones." And you can actually test your blood ketones with a $50 meter to see what number you're at. And people say if it hits 0.5, then you're in ketosis, the state of having ketones in your blood. We'll talk about how ketosis is defined. Some people define it as ketones in your blood, and some people define it as burning fat to make ketones. But the ketogenic diet is another way to do it. So you just lower your sugar intake, but you're still eating a lot of fat, 80% fat, 15% protein, 5% carbs. And that ketogenic diet state will also reduce your sugar and make it so your body says, "Hey, I need one of the 2 fuel sources. If you don't give me more carbs, I'm going to go burn fat to make ketones." What I work in is in the category of exogenous ketones. So drinking it externally, exogenous ketones. So I can talk about the different types in a second. But when you drink this, it will skip the fat burning step. So a lot of companies will claim, you're in ketosis in 30 minutes. And hyper-technically, scientifically, ketosis is defined as ketones in your blood. But most consumers hear the word ketosis and they think fat burning. So it's like this misleading trick with a lot of these companies that they say, "Hey, drink this in 30 minutes and you're in ketosis." And the consumer thinks, "Great, I can watch TV, drink this drink and be burning fat. This is amazing." It just doesn't work that way. And we even have a chart of like 10 of our products and all the different things that they can do and when to take different ones. And one of them says weight loss. And I just put a red X all the way across it, because if you don't understand and haven't listened to a podcast like this, you're just going to be disappointed and want to return it and be like, "Hey, I didn't lose any weight on it." Well, my father-in-law hasn't lost any weight and he's been taking it for 3 years. So if you don't use it right, if you don't understand how to use it, it's not gonna stop you. It's not gonna help you burn fat.
Yeah.
But there will be many of the other metabolic benefits of the ketogenic diet and brain flow and recovery. There are many other benefits to it, but just not the fat burning. So within exogenous ketones, you then have multiple categories. I like to call the MCT oil C8. I like to call that half of an exogenous ketone, because 15% of it will actually convert into beta hydroxybutyrate. That's the molecule that your body makes when you burn fat. But then you've got 85% that kind of count towards your fat macros on a ketogenic diet. There's issues with the MCT oil, GI problems. If you have half of a teaspoon too much. The number 2 video on my YouTube site is my wife took slightly too much like 7 years ago, and she just bowed over like, oh, and just all these stomach pains. I feel like people are,
it goes right out the other end for me if I.
Yeah.
So, green apple quick step.
They call that the diarrhea diet because it will create that. But even if over time you're able to slowly take it and take more of it, yes, you can get your ketones up to 0.5, 1.0. But Dr. Veach, who got me into all of this, was my wife's godfather. He passed away in 2020. He was not a fan of C8. He talked about the different, while it might raise your blood ketones and people might want to just compare products, ketone levels in the blood, to each other, there's many more things that are going on behind the scenes. And he thought that there was more negative than positive. So he was never a fan of that. So I eat keto and technically vegan, but I've been keto for the last 6-7 years. I just use liquid coconut oil on my food. I don't even use the C8. Right. So then there's that. And then the next category is called ketone salts. Mm-hmm. Now, one problem with the initial ketone salts, which is probably why you never noticed anything, was that they were racemic, which means that only half of it is bioavailable. So the body can't use as an energy source. And I say that because some people are saying that, well, maybe there's some signaling benefits. Okay, maybe. But as an energy source, as a calorie, half of it doesn't work. So you might see on these bottles 10 grams of BHB salts, but only 5 of it is bioavailable. And there's some theories that the form that your body can't use may block the correct form, the D form or the R form, from actually working. So that 10 becomes 5, becomes 4, and then you have this massive salt load, like 1 to 2, 3 grams of salt, sodium, potassium, magnesium, different types of salts, and then those will further block the ketones, and then ultimately in the end, it doesn't do anything. Now, some people have benefit. They think that they find benefit in them for one of 2 reasons. One, a lot of these drinks will add caffeine. Well, the ketones will multiply the caffeine 2 or 3x, but not in a good way. It's like you could just have 3x the amount of coffee if you wanted to, but you don't because you get jitters or you get a bigger crash. So we'll do that. So people want to feel it with those racemic salts. And then I mentioned the salt content is just way too high and unbalanced. So that's the racemic salts. Then they came out with the non-racemic salts, and mostly the R form, and that's better than the other stuff. It might look like it costs twice as much, but it's actually equally cost effective if half of it is bioavailable. So if one box says 10, you would be looking for something that says 4 to be the equivalent, setting aside the extra salt load that is problematic. So it cuts the salt load in half. The non-racemic is much better, but still the salt load is still too high. There might be instances where you're in like a super sweaty, motocross or something where you need more electrolytes. Then maybe you can take them. Oh, the second reason why it might work for people initially is when they enter into a ketogenic diet, people lose weight very quickly. But what they think they're losing is fat. What they're really losing is water weight.
Yeah,
that water weight
just depletes out of the muscles. Like, yeah. I know, any individual like myself or Anthony that's got a significant amount of muscle mass on them, like I can swing 10 or 15 pounds in body weight, like in a matter of, a day or 2 if I choose to, just by manipulating water and salt levels. And it sounds really wild, but you can do it really easy with muscle tissue. And same thing, you can also dehydrate your fat tissue and, not lose any fat as well. But the glycogen stores in the muscle, like switching those dietary styles, like if I drop my carbohydrate intake, I'll just dump so much water over a course of a day, and then all of a sudden swing back up, and it's like, hey, I just put on 7 pounds today. Well, yeah, I didn't put on 7 pounds.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So with that massive water loss, when someone enters into a ketogenic diet, they lose tons of salt. And I say to people, have you been replenishing with salt? And they say, yeah, I put more salt on my eggs. And I say, did you unscrew the salt container? Yeah. Like that's the amount of salt, like massive amounts of salt. So when people take these exogenous ketones that are ketone salts that are racemic, it's the salt that's actually maybe doing some benefit, getting them out of the keto flu, because when you don't have enough salt, You don't have, you don't
Oh,
have electricity going through your system.
Yeah, people don't understand the impact of salt. There's been so much misinformation for so long. When we get visitors to our house, family, friends, they're outside of the fitness community and unfamiliar. They're like, why is there salt containers everywhere? And why are you salting the drinks that you're making? It's like, that's what we do here. Like, So, I know you're the same way, Anthony.
The people that are taking the racemic salts, they could save a whole bunch of money just by buying just other salt packets or pink Himalayan sea salt. They would save a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then some companies try to sell these pills, either gummies or capsules that, people think that the ketone ester is expensive. And I try to do the math for them and say, in one of our servings is more ketones than maybe the entire bottle of this $20, $30, $40 bottle, where they have this, fraction of the ketone salts, and, maybe placebo effect, maybe the salt is benefiting them, but the ketone salts for the most part are, still worthless. Yeah. And then ketone ester is D-beta hydroxybutyrate bound to R1,3-butanediol. And I say the bound to because that's really important. It's not just free floating in the water. It's actually a chemical bond, and drug companies will make things into an ester form in order to enter the blood, but also in order to enter the brain. So like levodopa, you can consume dopamine and it'll get into your bloodstream, but it won't get into your brain. So they make levodopa in order to be able to get through both systems. So the ketone ester, initially they thought was cleaved in the gut, but then recent papers found that the ketone ester actually made it intact into the blood. And now what we're trying to do is prove that maybe it goes intact into the brain more readily. That's why when different companies might have a product that goes to 1 millimolar, 1 millimolar, 1 millimolar, you would think, okay, we'll just buy the thing that's the cheapest that will get you to 1 millimolar. But the experience people have is just drastically different when they have the ester, 1 millimolar worth of the ester versus other stuff. And there's a couple other ketone esters that have been popping up that are technically ketone ester, but this is the only one that's a ketone mono ester. Mono means one bond. So there's a couple other ones that are kind of confusing the marketplace. Some of them are 18% bioavailable, so it sounds great. $5 for 25 grams, but it doesn't do the same amount as a fraction of our stuff. So we still think that ours is the best value. And initially, we would sell these $30 bottles, and people would drink the entire bottle. And then, because that was based on mice data, but then over time, people were like, "Well, I took half and I had a better workout," or I took a quarter and then it went down and down. Before you knew it, the cap became the measuring tool. So one capful is $2.25 worth. And some people are able to take that little. Most people will take 2 capfuls, so like $5 a day, and use it for many things. First thing in the morning, or they'll use it pre-workout. Some people would rather use it post-workout. Some people actually use it before bed to go to sleep, which is counterintuitive. So there's
I've had good success with all of those strategies.
Yeah, all of the above. I do 40 to 60 milliliters a day.
You take an entire bottle per day?
Yes.
All right, that's a little bit on the high side, but if you find the benefits, and people say, hey, it's made my business more profitable, it's made me it's chump change based on the return that I've been able to get from it, then great. But that's on the high side. But
one of the things I was curious about, and I know you can answer this, I do get the benefit like pre-workout and post-workout and sleep. And those are 3 completely different situations. Like pre-workout, I feel like I'm able to train longer. My understanding is it's improving the efficiency of the cell and I'm using energy better. Post-workout, it's my understanding is it's going to keep the insulin levels elevated a little bit longer and potentially increase HIF-1A. So might be some benefits for erythropoietin. And before bed, my understanding is potentially give your brain a fuel source, so you're not. I don't know if somehow that's maybe blunting cortisol response, but it's almost like these ketones are so smart; they know what to do at the right time. Could you explain?
They adapt. They adapt. And what you were mentioning, the post-workout. Yes to the EPO. The other 2 I hadn't heard of, so it's above my pay grade. So something that Dr. Seeds said, then yes. But the insulin, I hadn't heard about that. But for recovery, there was a clinical trial where they simulated a Tour de France 3-week, 4 to 5 hours a day. They weren't elite athletes. They were well-trained athletes. There's a difference. And the ketone ester group was 15% faster in the end and able to do 15% more watts in their last few days of training. So now in the cycling world, it's kind of the default in the Tour de France. Like it's everywhere. We sponsor 2 or 3 teams, and 80% of the teams, order from us. So it's everywhere and the default now. And there's been some discussion. Oh, should we ban it? Well, you ban things that are unhealthy. I mean, cycling's unhealthy, and what this is doing is actually recovering you and making you, healthier. So, they were supposed to do studies a couple of years ago, and I don't know if they were too beneficial that they decided not to post them. But so it's a default in cycling, but it can be used in many other sports, like sports that have TBI, traumatic brain injury. For those people that have had TBI previously, I talked to one NHL guy. He's like 7 years trying to do chamber, pressure chambers, all these different biohacking things, 10 different things. And I said, this will work the first time. He's like, oh, that's kind of confident of you. How can you be so sure? I'm like, certain things I know work 20% of the time, and certain things I know work 90% of the time. TBI, 90% of the time. He drank it, didn't call me for a week, and I called him up. I'm like, hey, we had a phone call for about an hour. What happened? He's like, I just went back to normal. It just reset everything back to normal. And I remember. Okay,
so it wasn't just a relief during that period of time from the TBI symptoms?
It is a 4 hour. It lasts about 4 hours.
Okay.
So it's the brain. With the TBI, it's the brain is not able to metabolize glucose. So taking more glucose, that pathway is blocked. Ketone ester bypasses that pathway and just resets it. And I asked Dr. Veach they did a mice study. We didn't do it, but it was done before my time, where they gave a traumatic brain injury to the mouse. And beforehand, they were able to walk the maze in 30 seconds. And then after the TBI, they weren't able to walk it, period. They couldn't get to the other end. Then they gave them either a ketogenic diet or a ketogenic diet or ketone ester, 2 separate things, and it worked both ways. And they were able to walk the maze in 30 seconds. And I said to Dr. Beach, well, they just had a TBI. They must have been 10% slower, 20, something. And he's like, what part of baseline do you not understand? Like, they went back to baseline. The TBI was blocking off the sugar.
Yep.
You gave it the other fuel source, and it just fueled it up, which is why some people, when they take the ketone ester, lower amounts, like Anthony, the lower amounts, some people feel nothing. Because if you don't have a blockage, it's not really a stimulant. It's not a caffeine. It doesn't take you to 110. But the bigger brain energy gap that you have, the more it fills that void. So sometimes people are like, they'll take it like that hockey player, and he'll say, why is this not $1 billion cover, $1 billion company on the cover of Time magazine? I'm like, because not everyone feels what you just felt. So it works differently for different people.
Really interesting. Do you know if it has any effect on, the inflammation that's...
Yes. So it does a lot of anti-inflammation stuff. So part of the pre-workout benefits is anti-inflammation in 2 ways. One is people take it instead of sugar. So a lot of people like to talk about sugar and ketones, and that's what a lot of the clinical trials have done. And I'm just, if it works for you, great. But I'm not necessarily a big fan of that because the sugar is so inflammatory and creates lactic acid. Ketones create none. So when you're removing the sugar and you're just having ketones, how much of the benefit is what the ketones are doing and how much of the benefit is just not having the sugar, the negative? So yes, it has a very anti-inflammatory effect, and we saw it in some during COVID when there were breathing issues, people were able to take the ketone ester and have a 25% improvement in breathing in 15, 30 minutes. So we suspect that's the anti-inflammatory effect. People with asthma, my nephew is a swimmer, and you can hear him swimming from the upper decks. You can hear a wheezing. He takes the ketone ester, you don't hear anything. So yes, it definitely has anti-inflammatory effects. Now, is that what's working the most post-workout? Possibly.
Yeah, Anthony, that's a question maybe for you, but thinking about that might make it less of a post-workout concern if you're trying to add muscle mass. Would that be the effect? Because, you want some sort of inflammatory, just like you want to avoid, antioxidants in the post-workout period, avoid cold plunges, unless you're, like I said, like a fighter or something like that, where you need to mitigate that inflammation. There's there's reasons to do and not to do with as relates to anti-inflammatory products in the post-workout period. But what are your thoughts on that?
I would tend to agree, and I can't take credit for this. I learned this from Dr. Seeds, but I do the ketone ester with Trehalose sugar. And Trehalose.
That was one of my next questions. Was combined with the Trehalose. Can I take it with the Trehalose?
Yeah, and I guess the way it was explained to me, I'll do my best to relay this accurately. The Trehalose is a sugar that we don't have very many enzymes to break down, so it's going to be digested a lot slower and works as a prebiotic. When we do it with the ketones, there's not as much inflammation as if we were going to do like a straight glucose or dextrose or something like that. Additionally, because we have those elevated insulin levels post-workout, it's refilling the muscle glycogen stores and supporting a favorable shift in microbiome. I think, like with a lot of the listeners, people that are in our community, having a goal of strength and hypertrophy, I think there's some benefit to using maybe a little bit of sugar, so you do have that stimulus of inflammation, but not too much. But I definitely don't know as much as Frank on this, so I'm just speaking from N of one and conversation that I had with Dr. Seeds.
Well, we did add that to something similar to that to our snake water. So our snake water is a ketone ester plus a bunch of nootropics, but in there as well is isomaltulose, which is also a slow carb that might do something similar, but it's a very low dose. Like if you were to buy isomaltulose by itself, it would say 30 grams per serving. This is just 3 grams, just enough to keep your blood sugar from dropping too much with the ketone ester. But as far as, we've got many weightlifters that use this, especially if they do 2 workouts a day. They take it after their first workout, and they say that their second workout feels as if they hadn't worked out that day. And if they didn't have the ketone ester, their central nervous system just shuts down, and you're having, half the workout. So
I was going to say that's exactly my experience. That normally after heavy training, you just kind of have that like I want to lay on the couch feeling, but I don't feel like my central nervous system takes a hit. And kind of to parrot what you said in terms of like the amount of Trehalose that I use. It's never more than 10 grams, and that would be post-workout, and usually it's 5 to 10 grams. So it's, again, real small amount, and I've used the product you're talking about. I love it, and I have used that pre-workout. My favorite, and everybody thinks I'm weird, but I like the original Ketone Aid without the sweetener in it. I think it tastes good, and I just throw a couple of shots back and do the 5 grams of Trehalose, and my workouts have just gone to a whole nother level. So absolutely love it.
Yeah, I want to talk about my workouts with it as well here in a little bit, but
I will look into if you're looking to build mass, whether the ketone ester might be a step backwards. I'd have to find out about that. I don't know, because I think it does do other things.
It seems like there's some other pathways that it would be, that effect would potentially be, muted, mitigated, however you want to term that. But that's a question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I would like to know. What I'm finding the most fascinating is the impact on, resetting metabolic dysfunction and mitochondrial kind of dysfunction. And this is, just in, stealing from Anthony and using with a number of my clients with those issues. Typically, I'll employ injectable acetylene L-carnitine with a small window of a fast in the morning. And now adding the ketones to this, let's say a 2-hour fast with that, some injectable acetylene L-carnitine, and it seems to reset the entire day for energy levels for folks. Mm-hmm. And I'd love if there's anything that you can elaborate on what's happening with that on kind of a cellular level.
So I wouldn't know that. What I would suppose is that the ketone ester does increase delivery of some medicines and supplements. So like dopamine, if someone is on levodopa, they take ketone ester and they'll feel like they took a double or triple dose, but not in a good way.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just increasing the potency of what you're already giving them.
Well, I'm thinking about from the ketone aspect, because, the issue that we're trying to, direct there is, changing from a glycolytic component to, processing through the liver, our fats, delivering that to the bloodstream. And, you could talk specifically just what the ketones are doing in that aspect. I mean, we can cover, and I think we may have covered in other components, what the acetylene L-carnitine is doing and why the choice of injectable with that as it relates to, lipolysis and, liberating that fat tissue. You don't need to speak to using those two together because that's not your expertise.
Oh, okay.
So I should clarify. I'm looking to just what's happening with the ketones here. In that use, in this, somebody with some metabolic dysfunction or, mitochondrial dysfunction in processing and being, highly glycolytic, employing ketones with a small fast, let's say a 2-hour fast in the morning. How does that impact them as a whole?
Well, just sugar. Sugar is the root problem of everything. So those people with metabolic dysfunction are having problems processing sugar. So this is just giving them an alternative fuel source to bring them back to baseline, back to normal. And some of the critique about ketone ester is that it peaks at 45 minutes and then comes down very quickly, and people think that it's just gone. But they don't realize that the ketones don't do anything in the blood. They don't make it more red or more thin or anything. It is then starting to go to the brain and to the muscles everywhere except for the liver. The liver is the only place that it cannot help. But
which is where the acetylene L-carnitine comes in. So, which again, you don't need the expertise in that, but
so it's fueling everything down to the mitochondrial level, just giving it recharging, giving it the energy that it should be getting from sugar, but it can't get. So it's just the body's just starving.
The way I piece it together in my head, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is I just kind of imagine an assembly line and it gets backed up. We'll call that when we're having sugar and people can't keep up with it. So there's this, things are getting jumbled up, lack of efficiency. And when ketones are introduced, it's like all of a sudden you open up a whole nother assembly line and you can get caught up on that workload and you're still able to go back once, the workload gets a little bit more manageable and assemble the things on that first assembly line. But it kind of gives you that opportunity to catch up on things. So, the other way I kind of think about it, and this might tie into the energy, is that if somebody's in a state of glycolysis, they're making less ATP than when they're able to use other fuel sources. And when we introduce the ketones, it allows them to have that metabolic flexibility where they can create more ATP, which is ultimately going to be the currency of energy and even get a little bit ahead on things.
Yeah, that's a better way to explain it.
I love it. Anthony's always got some great references that help visualize it.
I have to make it simple for me. One of the really cool things that I've found with the ketone esters, and again, I can't take credit for this. I learned this from Dr. Seeds. When we look at all these people that are having problems with like post-viral fatigue and COVID, those sorts of things, the number one thing, the first go-to, ketone esters. And when we think about why, it's just checking so many boxes. It's reducing those inflammatory cytokines. I think it's IL-1B, IL-6. Frank's going to know this, and I'm probably going to mess it up. Is it 18 and 24?
No, that's seeds level stuff. So I know that it helps with the long COVID and the problems that you've been describing, but I don't get into the individual things like that.
The other really cool thing about it, and I guess this is fairly recent research, at least for me, is it seems like they have improved myocardial contractility for these post-COVID-19 patients when they use the ketone esters. And you think about, that's pumping the blood and the oxygen. And when we introduce these in there, it's like people feel awful after they're sick. And if we can get them back to, where the heart's pumping and oxygen circulating, they're developing the ability to use multiple fuel sources. There's so much we can do to recover faster from these viruses and I would think even strengthen the immune system.
Yeah, and they are doing multiple clinical trials on heart and heart failure. So the heart is just far more efficient using ketones. There was one paper where Dr. Veach saw it where they somehow we're able to determine that when in the instance of a heart attack, the body will seek out ketones all the way down to the toes. I don't know how they know that they're in the toes, and like suck it up because they need the ketones. And this paper 7 years ago, they didn't even know about ketone esters. And they're like, the body loves ketones, and they missed the connection. Well, now you can drink them. So the science is still very, very early, with all this stuff.
It's really amazing. When we talked previously, you did a beautiful job of explaining the difference between there's a couple different ketone esters there. And I knew obviously the Ketone Aid is the one that I use. I knew it worked. I knew it was the best, but really you did a beautiful job of breaking down what happens when you metabolize them and how some of the other forms can actually be a central nervous system depressant and put more of a load on the liver.
So yeah, let's touch upon that. So there's our ketone ester is D-beta hydroxybutyrate bound to R13-butanediol. The D and the R is what the body is, bioavailable. Sometimes they use the D and the R interchangeably. But then, so another company is C8 bound to R13-butanediol. That's the one that is only 18% bioavailable because just the way that the percentages of fat combining to R13, and it doesn't get into the bloodstream. It actually separates in the gut, and you have all the C8, which they do say you have to take it with food, which for me, 90% of our protocols are without food. So if the first thing you have to do is take it with food, well, then you have to take twice as much. It's just, they keep on changing the name of their brand, trying to, different marketing angles, and it's just, not working. You can try it, but don't blame ketones for not working if you've used that one.
I can say
there's another one.
Well,
there's one company that just put the two drinks ingredients together without the bond and just said, oh, well, let's just call it a day. It's good enough. It's backed by science. But each one of these science papers that they cite are ketone ester papers. And they just say, oh, well, it's close enough. Well, it doesn't work that way in science. It's not close enough. Or it'll raise blood ketones 60% compared to the ketone ester. And they say, oh, well, it's cheaper. So just drink 40% more and you'll be ahead on a cost. But there's more to it. This whole, ester, and does ester get into cells? Does ester get into brain? Things we haven't figured out yet. So that's a shortcut. And one guy called me up and said, hey, I've been using your stuff for years and I tried to find a cheaper thing. And I tried these two different companies. And, yours says D-beta hydroxybutyrate / R13-butanediol. 1,3-butanediol, and there says D-beta hydroxybutyrate, R13-butanediol, and the comma means that they poured them together, and the slash meant that it was an ester, so we have to change the wording to say a bond of this and this to be more specific, because this customer was like, when I take that drink and I walk my dog, I come back and I want to lay on the couch. It just, why isn't it the same thing? And I did a whole 30-minute video explaining it to him, because I'm sure everyone else has that question. Dom D'Agostino has a ketone ester that he did with mice that's not on the market. It's racemic 1,3-butanediol bound to acetoacetate. And they claim that maybe it will help you with your breath hold. And ironically, I tested the ketone esters. It's not scientific, but the breath hold actually went down when I used our ketone ester. And I was like, hey, why is yours going up? And one theory was maybe that product goes backwards in the Krebs cycle, which might have some benefits for some, if deep sea divers have the bends or something. There might be different uses for it, but it's just a drastically different market. But it's still technically called a ketone ester. So now scientists are calling it a ketone diester, the Dominic ester, because there's two bonds in there, and it's just a different molecule does something different. There's another one that is D-beta hydroxybutyrate bound to glycerol, technically a ketone ester, but not a ketone monoester. And the glycerol, basically, my understanding is that it converts into sugar, and of the molecule, you might say, 10 grams of ketones, but I think 70% of it is the glycol, is the glycerol. So you only have 3 grams of the BHB. So again, not nearly as bioavailable, but it looks cheaper when you're comparing, gram per gram. So there's a bunch of different companies trying to come out with, the next best thing. And then some companies will do just BHB free acid. So they take out the salt. One company that I thought was reputable on Amazon, it said it had 10 grams of free acid in an 11-gram pouch. We tested it. It actually only had 50 grams. and there's no salt in there, but then the free acid is super acidic, so it's a 2 pH, and it just doesn't get into the bloodstream nearly as well. We had a drink that we discontinued that was a mixture of ketone ester, ketone salt, ketone free acid, 60% ester, and the rest, the mix, and ultimately abandoned that and just stuck with the ketone ester, the KE4, the one that tastes super strong. But then we came out with something just called ketone shot, which I don't have around me, which is just a $5 shot of 5 grams of ketone ester. And that's basically the holy grail ingredient. Dr. Veach spent 40 years, and if you want to take a deep dive, read the book Ketones, the Fourth Fuel by Travis Christofferson. He spent 40 years figuring this out, and he would have picked the right one decades ago.
Yeah.
So I guess, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to ask more on the combinations with food, because I had an interesting experience. So we've talked a little bit about mixing with a little bit of slow digesting carbohydrates like Trehalose. You have one in your snake water ingredient, very small, 3 to 5, gram of a slow, and that being okay to do. And this might dive into a little bit more conversation on your other product, the hard ketones.
Oh yeah,
which have slightly different, use application, but is more of a kind of a weaning off of alcohol, or an alternative to alcohol is my take on it. Yeah. Right. So not quite as aggressive on, the cognitive, I guess, or recovery necessarily aspects, like the Ketone Aid is definitely, or the KE4 would be the go-to there. Correct me wherever I'm wrong. But I think last year I got a few cases of that, and I used it, and I wasn't feeling anything from it, but I was drinking it at dinner. And you recently sent me some, and I drank it in a fasted state, not expecting anything like prior. And immediately I was like, oh, I could feel this. And it was, like I said, I went through cases of it, and sometimes I drank like 3 in one sitting, just seeing if I could feel anything, and I wouldn't, but it would be like, I'm having, some ice cream with dessert, and then having those with it. And then it just wasn't doing anything for me. So
yeah, we don't know why. We don't know why, but empty stomach, we try to scream on the side of the can, empty stomach, it just makes a drastic difference. So that drink,
it was like, I literally, it was like, wow, okay, I feel this. I feel really relaxed, and just like I've had those kind of similar effects to alcohol, but without the negative effects of alcohol. It was really wild.
Do you take enough where you're like, I shouldn't be driving?
Yeah, I felt like on the verge of that, after the one drink, and before, like I said, I had 3 and felt nothing.
Because there are some drinks out there that are like calming, recess, and stuff like that, and they say that they have 5 ingredients. Here's the secret: there's only one ingredient in those things that does anything, and that's L-theanine. That's it. Everything else is just marketing. Ashwagandha takes 30 days to work. It's all marketing. If you want to save money, you can just get a seltzer and take a pill or 2 of L-theanine. This is way, way, way stronger and different than those things. And yeah, the empty stomach is key. We also found, ironically, that if you're taking SSRIs or kratom, it just blocks the buzz. So we give a guarantee if people don't feel the buzz. You feel the buzz or you return it. And 9 times out of 10, when I ask a little questionnaire, it's like, oh yeah, I do take SSRIs. Is that a problem? Well, it's on the side of the can. It's on the email confirmation. It's on the website. For some reason, it's blocking GABA receptors or something. We don't know why that doesn't work. So the hard ketones is a second brand that we launched. And the idea came from when I was talking to Dr. Veach. He was explaining this D-beta hydroxybutyrate in R13-butanediol. It enters into the bloodstream, and then it separates with enzymes. And you have the immediate release of the beta hydroxybutyrate, free acid. And then you have the R13-butanediol that goes through the liver and gets converted to 80% of it converted back to BHB. So then you have a fast release and a slow release. So I said to him, well, why not just give 25% more of the R13-butanediol, and it would cost much less. You don't have to make the ester. And he said, his answer was epic. He said the mice were stumbling. He's like, the mice, it was just evident that they were stumbling. So he was wanting to find something for therapeutic uses that raises blood ketones, to give the grandmas. And he's like, they toss that. And that's when I took it out of the trash can and said, I think some people might want to stumble. I mean, our goal isn't stumbling. Our goal is to have, a nice buzz, but a far, far healthier buzz. And some people compare it to Star Trek. They have the synthahol drink, which ours is even better than synthahol, because synthahol is an alcohol alternative that still gives them a buzz, no hangover, but then it doesn't have this extra benefit of actually making ketones go up, and then ketones get to do their own thing. The hard ketones is a very exciting product for people trying to get off of alcohol. It blocks alcohol withdrawal symptoms, alcohol cravings, and it might be more per can. And people scream about the per can price. And I say, well, we could dilute it in half and charge half as much. Would that make it better for you? You'd have to drink twice as much, but people have used it as a temporary transition to get off of alcohol, block the urges, and then 30, 60 days later, they just get off of our stuff and just go straight to water. That transition is easy. But people that drink 1 bottle of wine per night have reported that they are able to drink 2 cans of our stuff, and they just didn't have that craving. And one person said that they had this Star Trek type scan of their body that they didn't know that they had this desire and craving to go grab that wine bottle opener. It was just gone. Now, those people with high tolerances, they might not feel the buzz, but then the second benefit kicks in, which is people think that the addiction is to the buzz. It's not the buzz, because then weed or THC would relieve all alcoholics of their addictions, right? It doesn't. It's not the buzz. It's I think maybe Anthony knows, it's the acetate. The alcohol, ethanol converts into acetaldehyde, which then converts to acetate, and the brain craves the acetate. And then this helps block that craving. So people with a super high tolerance won't feel a buzz, but they'll feel calm, and they just don't have that desire for a few drinks. And then they wake up and they wake up feeling amazing, because they're used to feeling like crap every day, and that just becomes their new norm. And then suddenly they don't take it one night, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And they wake up not craving, another drink of hard ketones. This one lady who was 6 months sober, her husband said, no alcohol in the house, but then he understood the chemistry behind this, let her have some. She drank half of a can. She was lucky that she did feel a buzz, so it's cheaper for her. She put it back in the fridge, and she said, hey, if that was a 6-pack of beer, I'd have 1 sip. The entire 6 would have to be gone, 12. And then I'd wake up in the morning and think, where can I go and get my next 12-pack? She woke up and forgot that she even had that half can. And, a couple nights later, she had the rest of it. So it's a really, really exciting drink, but it's hard to grasp the concept of how is this possible? Because one company spent $20 million in the UK trying to find an alcohol alternative that changes the molecule that will not have the hangovers. And we have it.
All right, guys, we talk a lot about mental resilience on this podcast, but let's talk about another type of resilience. That's movement resilience. We want to move well, recover better, and do it for life. And it starts with your feet. And you can start today with Naboso. Naboso is a sensory technology company founded by a functional podiatrist. And all their products feature a texture to stimulate, strengthen, and awaken your feet. I use their splay toe spacers and Neuroball to release my feet at the end of every day. They also have these textured recovery socks that feel like a mini massage when you walk around. If you're looking for an effective way to bulletproof your feet, head to naboso.com, that's NABOSO.com, and use code RESILIENCE for 20% off. Yeah, no, I thought that's after that more recent experience, it's like, wow, this is a phenomenal product for that weaning off of alcohol. I haven't had a drink for like 1.5 years of alcohol anyway. But yeah, I think that's a really amazing potential. And that's where
a spritz, a strawberry spritz just came out.
Oh, and, nice.
We are working on concentrates now that are the same amount of 17 grams of the R13 per can. We're putting it into a small bottle so you can kind of put it into a seltzer and make your own cocktails, make your own
little mocktail or whatever. So yeah, that combination of food you've talked about a few times, like you have to take more. One of the things I was wondering about was, as it relates, because I'm just thinking about this. Well, for me, I found that I can go back to some longer fasts very, very effectively, and especially employing it with pre-workout. Like I've had many, like weeks or days recently where I fasted, all day, had my training session in the afternoon, amazing energy, feel great. But when I think about fasting, I think about the impact of like small things, like even, branch chain amino acids or essential amino acids will throw somebody out of lipolysis. Whey protein will do that. That's one of the reasons but I still like casein protein doesn't do that. So if I'm in a fast, I may still have I've got a product, 80-20 protein, and I'll have a scoop, and it's got 4 grams of whey in it, which is not enough to throw you out of lipolysis, but would be combining that casein somewhere in the timing with the KE4 interfere or make you need to take more of the, or should you keep those separate?
Is it a calorie or is it just supplements? Is it actual calories with that whey that you're taking?
So there's only 4 grams of whey in it. There's 16 grams of casein in it. But casein I know is very different than amino acids or whey, because just in relations to lipolysis. So that's where I was wondering if that also changes it with the ketones.
I don't know. It's more of a food absorption and like a stomach absorption into the system. That's why I was asking if it's calories, because people, when they take supplements, pills, doesn't seem to block anything. It's just when there's substance and food that the body needs to digest and break down, the ketones, it slows them down.
Okay.
But, so I don't know. Try different things, but I wouldn't know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've been doing the ketones, and then I'll do this 45 minutes later, and it seems to not affect it, but I wanted to get some, just see if you had any information as it relates to that.
Yeah, the science is so early. Every little question like that is like a 2-year million clinical trial. Every tiny question. But there's a debate, post-workout, do you take it immediately post-workout and then hold off on the protein, because people want to take protein right away? And I do recommend separating the two and not taking them immediately, because some people would take the ketone ester and then chug a big smoothie, and I think that'll block it.
So I guess the best question there is, what kind of separation would make sense in your mind?
Well, Dr. Dog talks about a 2-hour post-workout. We did a video. He's a doctor of one of the Quick Step team, one of the Tour de France teams for Astana right now. And he talks about this 2-hour window where many things are happening for 2 hours. So he recommends 2 hours, but some people do 1 hour. It would take an entire clinical trial to figure out, what's best. I think ketones and the protein is required in the world of ketones not existing. Now that ketones exist, it just changes the dynamics. And I don't know, maybe I would love someone to do some sort of recovery paper of ketones versus protein, because a lot of the papers right now are ketones versus sugar, or ketones versus sugar, or ketones and sugar versus sugar, which is a little bit different. So hopefully one day someone will try to test that.
Yeah.
I've been playing around with it a little bit, and I remember reading that collagen synthesis is upregulated for, I think it's actually 48 hours after a workout. So I used to do kind of the ketones and the shake right away, but what I do now is the ketones, and it's about 30 minutes, and then I do shake after that. But it sounds like I might even be able to push that back a little bit more. The
blood peak is 40 minutes, depending on the quantity that you take. The blood peak can be at 40 minutes. So right when you're peaking, adding the big amount of food, okay, maybe it's already gotten into the system, so maybe that's enough, but I don't know, maybe another 15 minutes.
Yeah. So I want to touch on that really quick, Anthony, because yes, in the post-workout period, collagen synthesis is heightened over glycogen replenishment, as well as muscle protein synthesis. But the timing of that, because of the absorption rate, I recommend that you take the collagen pre-workout so that you take advantage of the post-workout elevated synthesis. So that's my recommendation when it comes to optimal time is, obviously take it with your vitamin C, because you lose, it bumps the absorption by 50%. But that's correct. Post-workout collagen synthesis is upregulated more than others, but because of the digestion timing and the timing of those things, take it in the pre-workout, and then that'll actually be there, the post-workout, which then makes it work really well with the ketones, because, the collagen from your GI tract is already gone. because you've worked out for an hour and a half. You probably took the collagen 2 hours beforehand. So you got a big window there, and you can maximize both of those.
That makes sense.
So,
yeah.
Now, let me talk real quickly about fasted workouts with like running or cycling or even, working out in the gym. So some people will do fasted workouts before the ketone ester was around because they knew that the inflammation was lower. They knew of all these benefits. They could do more hard workouts per week, but they expected that their watts and their performance would be lowered by 5 or 10%. It's just an expectation. Hey, I'm going to be fasted, so I don't have a fuel, but it has these other fat burning benefits. What we're finding with the ketone ester, and this is all not clinical trial stuff, this is all just anecdotal, thousands of people giving feedback, is that their numbers are going back to baseline. Even with a tiny amount of ketone ester, they're just going back to baseline. Not better necessarily than all this glucose, but then they have all the other benefits that they, had if they were just doing the fasted workout, the recovery and all those other things. So that's kind of the goal is if you already know that you've done fasted workouts, you're like, I don't like them because they don't have as much punch to them. My reps aren't as much. You take a little bit of ketone ester and you match your sugar performance with a lot less calories and then all the other benefits.
I'm doing the combination of the ketone and the another Alcar shot of 200 to 300 milligrams, and my performance is better than in the
I just want to manage,
and that's with
I don't want to oversell things, but
no. I'm just sharing my anecdotal experience with my audience. That is absolutely tremendous. So I'll do ketones in the morning with Alcar, and then an hour or so later I might have some casein, and then this is on full day fasted where then I'm training at like 4:00, and I might have another casein somewhere in the afternoon, have another window, and then KE4 and another Alcar shot, and my workouts are just through the roof. Just awesome.
Do you have any caffeine in your equation?
Yes, I do. So I'm taking full blitz, which Anthony's aware of that. So we've got nitrates, lactate, but L-citrulline, beta-alanine, beta-anhydrous, arginine nitrate, calcium lactate, not for the calcium, but for the lactate, rhodelia, L-theanine, and then for the nootropics, I've got caffeine anhydrous, and then DMAE. So yeah, it's
just be aware that the ketone ester might be multiplying those things. So if you want to try it with and without, and I would just be worried that it might be just multiplying what you're taking by 3x, and what you're feeling in the gym, this revved up, might be the increased delivery of that.
That I could see that, but at the timing window. So I have this first because if I have stimulants past 3, it'll interfere with my sleep. Mm-hmm. But I'm not seeing. So I tab it at 3, and then I'll have the ketone esters maybe 45 minutes later as I'm going to the gym. But if this was ramped up at any level at the dose that I take, I would have trouble in loss of sleep, and my sleep scores on my Oura Ring and my feeling of sleep have been unaffected. But I do feel like it is hitting harder for sure, but I'm not, as in just the mental cognition standpoint, but I don't feel more like off the walls bouncy or any residual, and I come down off of it very good. So, but thank you for making that aware for the audience. Yeah.
Your recovery between reps. Have you noticed anything different there? Because that's something that it also does. So normally you might need a minute to recover. Now you're like at 45 seconds, you're like, you know what? I'm just going to go back. Like that is a big difference for weightlifters.
Yeah, that is definitely highly notable and really important for me for maximizing, the window of time I have to train to get all my work in, not having to do that. So, wait
some
as
people
long.
will take the ketone shot and actually add it to their water bottle as well to have a slow release, during the workout. That's another way to take a little pop in the front and then a slow release during.
Yeah, I've done that with the snake water that you sent. I sipped on that through the workout, and that was great, but I haven't played with it since then. Yeah. Anything else fascinating that you're seeing in the research that we haven't talked about as of yet?
Well, there's the EPO research, which I don't fully understand, because I know when you go to high altitude, the body will make more EPO naturally. So it's mimicking some of that high altitude benefits of EPO. There's the recovery paper. There was one paper where they were doing ketone ester and sugar plus, versus sugar by itself. And I said, please, can you have a third arm that's just ketones? And they're like, no, there's no way that the ketones by itself could be better, because you got the two fuels versus the one. Sure enough, 2 years later, ketone ester by itself increased performance by 4% in running economy and 2% versus the combo. So by itself, in that exact instance, does not mean that it's going to do for everything else. And I need to make that very clear. Just that in that exact instance with 10 people, it happened to be that the ketone ester worked better. And my theory is that it is kind of like a dual fuel. It's your body making its own endogenous production plus a little bit more of a boost of the exogenous production on top of it. So you do kind of get those dual fuels. So that paper was, breakthrough. And then there's a paper where the appendix talked about how the ketone ester was taken, and they were able to measure ketones in the brain, and it stayed high for 90 minutes to 2 hours. And then they redid it and they haven't published it. It stayed high for like 3 hours, ketones in the brain. So again, people think that it peaks at 40 minutes and then it's just gone. They showed it in the brain super high, and they couldn't have the people in the MRI scans sitting, laying there any longer. They're like, got to get them out, but it was staying super high. There's some papers that don't work, that, sometimes it's just a crapshoot, and, they're using the ketones and the glucose. They try to show that ketones are not muscle. There's a theory that it's glycogen sparing. I never really liked that theory. So they tested it out by having them take ketone ester, wait until the ketone ester goes to 0, and then start the time trial to see whether it saves some glucose from their warm up. And they didn't show anything. So there's a bunch of papers that show that it didn't do anything. But I do tell people, don't take this on game day, because when it works, it works. But when it doesn't work, it can impair your performance severely. If it drops your blood sugar too much, or you're used to a certain ingredient, but then you're switching out, don't go straight into game day. Use it half a dozen, if not a dozen times. Some people actually will use it for the 2 weeks leading up to the event, and then on the event, go back to the regular protocol for food. And it has this like mitochondrial building benefit 2 weeks beforehand. And then they're getting PRs just by going back to their apples, gels, power bar, protocol. But they're like, hey, I felt lighter on my feet because the ketones still be in the system. I'm like, no, it just was helping build mitochondria, made you more fresh, like you're tapering for the Olympics. I will say that the ketone ester works better the older you are. The older you are, the less mitochondria you have, the less recovery.
Oh, yeah.
I saw they're doing some studies on frailty in older individuals with ketone esters. And
I think they're working on that. I think it might be a different ketone ester, but yeah, they're getting money for that. So, and then the younger people, they want to have their own benefits. Like, okay, it might work for you, these other pathways and benefits, but it might not make your brain as clear. But towards the end of the workout, your brain does start to have some glucose metabolism problems. So when your brain is just not as sharp as the end of you're doing like trail running or motocross, after half an hour, your brain starts to fry. You take more glucose and it won't go up there. It's the same assembly line problem. The ketones will, help people that are mentally at a deficit. But if you're not at a deficit, these younger people, they might not feel it.
Yeah.
But I do reports from people that are like college students that are like, oh, you need to overnight me the KE4 because he's been using it for studying and he needs it for this final exam. And so for some people, it works. Some people, they can even lower or remove their Adderall. People are using it instead of Adderall for mental clarity. But it's all over the board, but it tends to work better for the older people.
That makes sense. Just like the TBI case as well, right? So, when it comes to the more degradation you have had in mitochondrial function, the more impact it's going to play a role. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
One of the really cool
I think that's
things
some really good clarity as a takeaway from this episode as well. Like, it's helping restore the pathways, right? And so if those pathways are in great shape, there's less that it's going to do
and
for
making
you.
new pathways, because it's not necessarily restoring there could be research that it might help restore the sugar delivery, but it's this new pathway to get there.
Yeah.
One of the cool things that, or I guess two of the cool things that I learned about ketone esters, and this kind of ties into the younger crowd. I tell people, keep taking them because it's actually going to upregulate the expression of antioxidant genes, and then it selectively regulates histone deacetylase, which is going to be gene copies. And those two benefits, it's the kind of thing where like you're not just going to take it and be like, oh, no oxidation in my brain, but as you continue to upregulate these antioxidant genes, and to kind of put it in context, like what that means or how I think about it, when we think about modafinil and how effective that is, a lot of its action comes from antioxidant activity in the brain. And when these ketones are upregulating antioxidant genes, you can see yet another mechanism, another pathway that they're supporting long-term cognitive function and protecting that brain.
Yeah. So it'll definitely help with long-term cognitive function. I just tend to not talk about things that people don't feel immediately.
Yeah.
I tend to focus on whether you feel it or not. But yeah, there's science for longevity, just straight up living longer. Whether the earlier you start, the better. Yeah. And
that was a question that it is a path that was on my notes to ask you about. And
Brian Johnson, the king of longevity, he's, did a video recently of his travel bag, and there was ketone ester in there. Our ketone ester in there.
Yeah. I have trouble listening to anything Brian says, but not saying he's wrong on everything. But
he wasn't paid. The point was he wasn't paid. And he bought it. So,
so tell me, outside of that, I was just making a joke. Sure. So tell me about any of the research as it relates to the longevity.
Well, there's a paper that Dr. Veach wrote 8 years ago, well above my pay grade. There's only like a handful of people that can read these things and understand it. And he talks about all the animal studies where they gave a restricted diet, or they put them on a ketogenic diet, or they fasted, and the animals lived longer. And there are all these theories. And he said the papers all missed the point. It was the ketones, stupid. Each one of these trials triggered BHB release, and it was the BHB that was making them live longer, not the caloric restriction and all these other benefits. He's written a paper on that. I think they did test the C. elegans. It showed benefit with the C. elegans for longevity. There's a lot more to it that I am not versed in, because that's a slippery slope with science. Maybe Anthony knows more about that, but
it makes perfect sense to me when you think about the positive impact it's going to have on cardiac function, upregulating of antioxidant genes, and effects on histone deacetylase, as well as reduction of inflammatory cytokines. Those are all things that are going to contribute to longevity. But that's a paper I'm going to dig up. I'd absolutely love to read it. It's probably above my pay grade, but I'll ask Dr. Seeds to explain it to me, and hopefully I'll be able to understand it a little better. But yeah.
Yeah, let's touch base on that later, Anthony, because I find that that thought process, obviously we know that caloric restriction has an impact. It's been well studied, and anything. But I always struggle with, that approach, because it's also inhibiting, muscle protein synthesis and the growth. Like there's a few, and obviously not having mass on your frame as you get older is going to have a negative impact as well. But thinking about this as an entirely different pathway than just the caloric restriction is really interesting. What you said really makes sense there. I definitely would love to see that paper as well.
Yeah, well, I'll try to find you some papers on ketone ester and muscles. It does something that was unexpected on the restoring and maintaining muscle as well.
I remember.
Yeah, I would expect that, just as intuitively. I wonder what that, how that operates, right? Because I just don't. Like I said, obviously the question is raised around the anti-inflammatory nature of it in that period of time, but intuitively it just tells me that that's not really, all to the story, right?
Sure.
I think a great question for you, Frank, to give our listeners kind of a takeaway would be, if somebody's excited about trying ketone esters, what would you say your starting protocol would be? Just simple, generic. I know there's so many different variations of it, but for somebody to start feeling the benefits.
Well, I asked Anthony Kunkel that. He's a 50-miler runner, and I said, if you had one chance to give it to a skeptic, what would that one time be? And he said, go for a long run, whatever's long for you. It could be 2 miles, can be long for you, or it can be 50
walk
miles.
into my car.
And whenever your brain starts to go, then take one full bottle of the ketone shot, this small bottle like this, one full bottle of the ketone shot, and see that your brain within 5-10 minutes goes back to baseline. So that's one way to take it. The second no-brainer way to take it is for recovery. Immediately after your workout, how much to take? Anywhere from, I like to put it in terms of dollar amounts because there's grams and there's water in these two different drinks. So anywhere from $2.50 worth to $10 worth is what you can take, and find out, how little you can use and what's effective for you. Pre-workout, that you have to really take a deeper dive, because people want to follow the protocol, but then they want to add the apple. And it's just this one runner, marathon runner, he ran and he used it in his workouts for a week, loved it. Game day, fasted. Game day, added a power bar and an apple. And he's like, it was a horrible race. So what happened? I'm like, well, why'd you add the power bar and an apple? He's like, well, I need something for my race. Well, yeah, your body has pounds and pounds of energy and that might have stopped any of the endogenous production. It was horrible. The next time, he actually took it for a week or two, and I told him game day to go back to his regular scheduled program. And he's the one that said, yeah, I had a 18-month PR, felt light in my feet, or the ketones still in me. So we do have protocols on the website, but they're very specific, and it's harder to figure out. If you already do fasted workouts, then it's an easy no-brainer. You can add 1 to 2 capfuls pre-workout, or 1 capful before and a capful slow released into the water bottle. That's easy. But if you're a big 300 calories of sugar and caffeine eater, and you drop that and you try to take 10 calories of our stuff, and you're like, oh, I didn't notice anything, it's like, well, it's hard to compare those two things. So, and then before bed, you have to watch out. If you're taking it too many times during the day, you might want to skip before bed, because if you take a little bit too much before bed, it can kind of turn on the brain, and you don't want that. So once my wife was arranging the closet at 11 p.m., what happened? It was like, oh, I tried to go to bed, and I normally take 2.5, but I took 5, and then she's organizing the closet. So you have to find the exact amount. Some people will take as little as half of a cap, the actual cap, half of a cap full immediately before bed, and they find the cortisol spikes. They don't wake up 2 to 3 times. They wake up, one person said, my cell phone was still on my chest when I woke up in the morning. They hadn't rolled over all day. They were just deeper sleep. And that's the most cost-effective way. If you can't use it any other way, there's nothing better than improving your sleep. If you can help someone sleep, everything else gets in the line. Yeah. And then getting off of alcohol, there's nothing better that you can do than, even if it's just 1 glass of wine a day, you can make a massive improvement to your health.
Yeah, I've found that even if it's just a couple drinks a week, getting completely off alcohol is a game changer. So
that's what the hard ketones really help people do that.
So where can people find you and learn more?
Yeah, so ketoneaid.com, KETONEAID.com, and then the hard ketone side, we have hardketones.com.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you being on with us and being on longer than we had scheduled. So much appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Really an honor to talk to you, Frank. I appreciate you sharing so much knowledge, and absolutely love your product. I tell people anytime I travel, the first thing I pack is my Ketone Aid.
Well, it works with jet lag too. So
it does, really.
It helps with the jet lag. Don't eat during your 10-hour flight. Take a sip every 2 hours, and then you'll wake up. You'll land 10 hours away and go on a 5-mile run, and you'll be fine.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to try that protocol. I hate the impacts of travel. I hate it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Frank.
All right. Thank you.